The deep spaceship Horizon Dawn drifted through the dark emptiness between stars. It had been traveling for weeks without finding anything new. Inside the ship, the crew of 4 tried to keep busy, scanning old planets that the charts called uninhabited. Captain Mira Holt sat in the command chair, her eyes fixed on the glowing screen. Her uniform was simple, but her face carried the marks of long journeys, calm, serious, and ready for anything. Beside her, Reed, the engineer, checked the sensors while humming softly to keep himself awake. Toma, the linguist, sat in the back, organizing reports from other sectors. The last member, Jalen, the security officer, stood near the door with his arms crossed, always watching and waiting for trouble. The silence inside the control room was broken by a sudden beep. The console's lights flashed and a strange rhythm filled the air. It was not random. It came in steady intervals like a heartbeat. "What is that?" Reed asked, adjusting the receiver. Mira leaned forward. "It's a signal. Old frequency, very old." Toma frowned. "Human or alien?" Reed shook his head. "Hard to tell, but it's repeating every 12 seconds. The sound echoed again, deep and mechanical. It didn't sound like distress, it sounded alive." Jalen moved closer. "Where is it coming from?" Reed tapped a few keys and the star map appeared. A small yellow planet blinked in the corner of the screen. Planet Orthus 4, desert world. No atmosphere worth breathing, no water, no life signs. But the signal is strong. Mira thought for a moment. Could be a lost colony beacon. Or a trap, Jalen said quietly. Mira turned to face him. "Everything out here is a risk. That's what we signed up for." Within the hour, Horizon Dawn set its course for Orthus 4. As they neared the planet, sandstorms covered most of the surface. But through the dust they could see strange shapes, large stone structures buried halfway beneath the dunes. Reed whistled. "Looks like temples." "Temples?" Mira repeated. On a dead world, the landing ship detached, descending through thick clouds of dust and heat. The surface was harsh, filled with sharp winds that carried fine grains of sand. When they landed, the team stepped out in their suits, the air filters humming quietly. The ground beneath them was cracked and golden. In front of them rose a half-buried wall covered in unknown carvings. Toma moved closer, brushing the sand away. "These symbols," he said slowly. "They look like human script mixed with machine code." Reed crouched beside him. "You think people made this?" "I'm not sure," Toma answered. "Maybe something that learned from people." Mira looked around. The dunes stretched endlessly in all directions, but she could feel something under her feet. A vibration, steady and soft, like a slow pulse. "Reed," she said, "run a ground scan. I want to know what's under us." He unpacked the scanner, setting it on the sand. Blue light spread out in a circle, scanning deep into the earth. The screen showed massive shapes hidden beneath, towers, tunnels, and what looked like moving energy lines. Reed blinked. "Captain, there's metal under here. Not just scraps. Whole structures. Buried machines?" Mira asked. "Yes. And something else." His voice grew lower. "Something big." Toma looked toward the carvings again. "Maybe this is a tomb." Jalen turned sharply. "A tomb that sends signals?" The wind howled across the desert, blowing sand against their visors. Mira tightened her grip on the scanner pad. "Whatever this is, it's not natural." They decided to camp near the ruins for the night. The small light from their base tent cast shadows across the dunes. Reed kept studying the scanner's data, while Toma tried to translate the symbols they had copied. Jalen patrolled around the camp, watching the storm fade into darkness. Inside the tent, the air was quiet except for the hum of equipment. Toma finally spoke. "I think I found part of the translation. It says, 'The Guardians wait beneath the dust until the Dreamer wakes.'" Mira looked up. "Guardians? Dreamer?" He nodded. "It repeats several times. And this mark here, it means silence or warning." Reed rubbed his forehead. "So it's telling us to stay away." Jalen entered the tent. "We might want to listen. Something's moving out there." The others froze. "What do you mean, moving?" Mira asked. "I saw shadows in the storm," he said. "Big ones. Not just sand shifting, shapes, slow and heavy." Reed tried to laugh it off. "Could be rocks or dunes collapsing." Jalen didn't smile. "Rocks don't walk upright." They went outside together, lights cutting through the swirling dust. At first there was nothing. Then through the storm something massive shifted, far away but unmistakably tall and wide. A long, deep vibration rolled through the ground. Mira raised her scanner. "Power spike below us," Toma whispered. "The signal." The heartbeat sound returned, louder this time. It echoed through the dunes, steady and cold. The carvings on the wall began to glow faintly blue, lines of light tracing through the stone as if the ruins themselves were waking up. Reed backed away. "Captain, something's activating." "Get to the ship," Mira ordered. They ran through the sand as the hum turned into a deep mechanical roar. Behind them, the dune began to rise like a wave. Something enormous moved beneath it. The sand slid away, revealing what looked like a hand. Metal covered in dust, its joints creaking as it pushed through the surface. Jalen turned, aiming his rifle. "What is that?" The figure rose higher, tall as a building shaped like a giant armored statue. Its head was smooth and featureless except for two faintly glowing eyes. It didn't attack. It only stood there, facing the ruins, motionless but aware. Mira stopped for a moment, staring up at it. "It's not alive." Toma's voice shook. "Not dead either." The giant lowered its head slightly as if listening to the wind. Then it froze again, the glow fading from its eyes. The ground stopped shaking. Silence returned. They reached the landing ship, breathing hard. Mira ordered the engines to power up, but Reed stopped her. "Captain, wait." The signal, it stopped. She looked at him. "What?" Reed checked the screen. No signal, no pulse, nothing. It went completely silent when the giant stopped moving. Mira looked back toward the dunes. The figure stood there like a monument, half buried again. Toma said quietly, "Maybe it only wakes when someone enters the tomb." Jalen frowned. Then it was guarding something. Mira's eyes followed the faint outline of the massive being. A tomb guarded by giants that are neither alive nor dead. That's what we just found. The desert wind began to rise again, covering the tracks they had made. The horizon glowed faintly under the twin suns, and for a moment everything looked still. But deep beneath the sand, something pulsed again. Faint, rhythmic, waiting. The team didn't notice the new reading flickering on Reed's monitor. Far below, deeper than any scan had reached before, there was movement. Not one, but many. The tomb was not alone. Mira didn't yet know it, but the discovery on Unearthed would change everything. The Guardians were only the beginning, and whatever they were protecting was still asleep, dreaming in the silence beneath the dunes. The next morning on Unearthed began with a faint golden light spreading across the dunes. The crew of Horizon Dawn woke early, still shaken by what they had seen during the night. The image of the metal giant standing in the sand would not leave their minds. Captain Mira Holt stood outside the tent, her boots half buried in the soft dust. She looked toward the direction of the ruins where the giant still stood silent. The winds had softened during the night, and now the air was still. For a moment it looked as if nothing had happened, but Mira knew better. Reed joined her, carrying the portable scanner in his hands. His eyes were tired, but curiosity burned in them. "The readings from last night don't make sense," he said quietly. The energy came from deep underground, not from the giant itself. It was being powered by something below. Mira nodded. Then the signal wasn't calling us to it. It was warning us not to wake whatever is under there. Toma and Jalen stepped out of the tent next. Toma was holding his data tablet covered in strange symbols from the walls. "Captain," he said. I translated more of the markings. "They mention a place called the Chamber of the Dreamer. It lies beneath the Guardians. There's also a line that says, 'He sleeps so they may stand.'" Reed raised an eyebrow. "Who is he supposed to be?" Toma shook his head. "I don't know. But the same word appears again and again. It means protector." Mira looked toward the ruins once more. "Then we're going to find him." Jalen frowned. "Are you sure that's a good idea?" "Those things almost crushed us last night," Mira answered calmly. "They didn't attack. They were guarding. If we move carefully, we can learn what they're guarding and why." They spent the next few hours setting up equipment near the ruins. Reed used the ship's power tools to cut through the surface sand and uncover the main doorway. Beneath the golden dust, a dark metallic surface appeared. The door was shaped like a massive circle, its edges covered with ancient symbols. "It's sealed from the inside," Reed said after testing it. "But the locking system uses old mechanical parts. I might be able to open it." Toma studied the carvings. "The symbols here say, 'Only those who remember will pass.' It could be a code." Mira stood beside them. "Then we'll try both ways." translation, and mechanics. It took several hours of work before Reed managed to connect a power line to the ancient door. As the system hummed, small lights appeared on the edges of the circle, glowing the same faint blue color as the giant's eyes. The ground trembled softly, and the door slowly rotated open, sending a gust of cold air upward. A dark tunnel stretched ahead, leading deep into the tomb. "Keep your helmets on," Mira ordered. "We don't know what's inside." They stepped carefully into the tunnel, lights shining along the smooth metallic walls. The air was heavy but breathable. Strange patterns ran across the surface, glowing faintly as they passed. After walking for several minutes, they entered a massive chamber. The ceiling rose so high that their lights could not reach it. Lining the walls were enormous statues, more giants, but these were different. They were kneeling, their heads bowed, their hands resting on large shields. Reed whispered, "There must be 20 of them." Each statue seemed made of both metal and stone, fused together perfectly. Their armor was covered in strange runes. The blue light from their eyes glowed dimly, like embers that refused to die out. Toma pointed toward one of the walls. "There's writing again." The words were written in a mix of human language and alien code. After a few minutes of studying, Toma read aloud, "We gave them our strength so that one might dream forever. The Guardians live, though their hearts are silent." Reed looked around. "They live, though their hearts are silent. That sounds like machines with no power source." Mira stepped closer to one of the statues and placed her hand on its leg. The surface was cold but not lifeless. It vibrated softly as if something inside was still functioning. Suddenly, the lights across the chamber flickered. The hum of ancient machinery filled the air. Reed jumped back and Jalen raised his weapon. The statues began to move slowly, the sound of grinding metal echoing through the chamber. Mira shouted, "Hold your fire! Wait!" The nearest giant lifted its head, blue light glowing brighter in its eyes. It turned toward Mira and the others but made no move to attack. Instead, it stepped aside, creating a path deeper into the tomb. Toma said softly, "It's letting us pass." They followed the path, moving carefully between the giants. The air was filled with dust and the scent of old metal. The deeper they went, the more the walls changed. Symbols became more human, and the floor was made of familiar steel panels rather than carved stone. "This section was built by humans," Reed said in surprise. "Old design, probably over 2 centuries old. So humans were here before," Mira said. "But how did they build all this?" They reached a large doorway covered with thick cables and glowing energy lines. A faint vibration came from behind it, steady and slow, like a heartbeat. Reed placed his scanner against the surface. "Energy output is huge. This door leads to the power source." Toma ran his fingers over the markings. These words again. "The dreamer sleeps. Do not disturb his rest," Mira thought for a moment. "If the Guardians protect the dreamer, then we might be standing above whatever is keeping them alive." Before anyone could stop him, Reed activated the door's control panel. The cables glowed brighter and the door slowly opened. A deep cold mist poured out and the heartbeat sound became stronger. Inside was another vast chamber, perfectly round and silent except for the hum of energy. In the center stood a huge metallic platform and on it lay a transparent pod. Inside the pod was a human figure. The crew froze. Toma whispered, "That's impossible." The figure inside looked peaceful, eyes closed, body perfectly preserved. He wore an old Earth Federation uniform, the design used more than 200 years ago. Mira stepped closer. "He's alive," Reed checked the readings. "Not exactly. His body is in a state between life and death. Brain activity is low but steady. The pod is feeding energy into both him and the Guardians." Jalen looked at the cables leading from the pod into the walls. "So he's the power source." Toma stared at the pod. "The dreamer. He must be the one the inscriptions spoke about." Suddenly, the air shimmered and a faint holographic image appeared above the pod. It was the same man standing tall and calm, his face kind but firm. His voice was soft, but it carried across the room. "I am Commander Avon," the image said. "If you are seeing this, then the Guardians have allowed you entry. I was the last of my kind here. I volunteered to become the core, the one who dreams so that the giants may stand." The crew listened silently as the projection continued. "This tomb is not a grave. It is a fortress. We built it when the stars turned against us. The Guardians were made from both man and machine, bound to my life, As long as I sleep, they will stand watch. If I wake, they will rise. The hologram flickered for a moment, then spoke again. You must not wake me unless humanity faces its end. The power that keeps me alive also binds the machines. Disturb it, and you may destroy the balance that has held for centuries. Then the image faded, leaving only the faint hum of the pod. Reed stepped forward. Captain, we need to study this technology. It could change everything. Mira shook her head. We can't take that risk. The commander said disturbing it might destroy everything. Before they could decide what to do, the ground trembled again. One of the giants from the previous chamber entered the doorway, kneeling before the pod. Its eyes shone brightly. The sound of machinery echoed above as if more giants were waking across the tomb. Toma looked at the scanner and whispered, "The energy output is rising on its own. Something is changing." Mira's heart pounded as she turned toward the pod. The dreamer's eyes moved slightly under his closed lids. The heartbeat sound grew louder. Whatever was sleeping was beginning to stir, and above the desert under the rising suns, more giants began to rise from the sand, ready to follow their ancient command. The tomb beneath Orthus IV was alive with sound. The deep hum that had once been faint now rolled like thunder through the tunnels. The floor vibrated under every step, and small ripples of blue light crawled across the walls as though the structure itself were waking from sleep. Captain Mira Holt stood near the glowing pod, staring at the face of the man inside. His features were calm, almost peaceful, but the faint movements behind his eyelids made it clear that something inside his mind was stirring. Reed checked the scanner again and frowned. The energy is rising fast, Captain. The pod is pulling power from the deepest level of the tomb. If it keeps going, the whole structure might overload. Toma looked around uneasy. Maybe we should leave before it's too late. Mira shook her head. Not yet. If the system wakes completely, the Guardians might start moving again. We need to understand what's happening first. Jalen stood by the door, watching the shadows shifting in the corridors. The giant that had knelt before the pod earlier was still there, silent now, its eyes dim, but every few seconds a faint flicker ran through its body, like breath trying to return. Reed tapped the side of his helmet. I think the entire power grid of this place runs through him, the man in the pod. If we disconnect him, the whole tomb might shut down. Or collapse, Mira replied. Toma stepped closer to the pod, his fingers brushing the smooth surface. The inscriptions called him a protector. Maybe he was part of some old experiment to create living machines. Reed thought for a moment. That could explain the Guardians. Maybe they were meant to defend colonies, but something went wrong and they buried the whole thing. The hum grew louder. A beam of light shot from the pod to the far wall, and the holographic image of Commander Avon appeared once more. His eyes opened slowly, glowing faintly blue like the giants outside. You are still here, his voice said calmly. You have entered the chamber of the dreamer. Why? Mira stood firm. We found your signal. We thought it was a distress call. We came to investigate. The projection looked at her for a long time before replying. The signal was not a call for help. It was a warning. The dream must not end. Reed stepped forward. Your systems are breaking down, Commander. The energy flow is unstable. If we don't shut it down, this whole place could explode. Avon's image flickered. If you shut it down, the Guardians will die. And if they die, what I was meant to protect will be lost forever. Toma asked quietly. What is it you're protecting? The projection hesitated, then the walls shifted. Panels opened to reveal glowing symbols and maps of distant star systems. In the center of one map, a large red circle pulsed slowly. This, Avon said, pointing to the circle, is the origin of the threat we once faced, a force that devoured human colonies, leaving nothing alive. I was the last commander of the Ardent Shield Project. We created the Guardians to defend what remained of humanity, but the cost was too high. I gave my life to power them. My body sleeps, my mind dreams, and through that dream they remain standing. Mira listened in silence, her heart heavy. You sacrificed yourself to keep them alive. Yes, Avon said. I became the bridge between man and machine. Neither alive nor dead, bound to the Guardians forever. Reed frowned. That's not sustainable. Systems like that degrade over time. Sooner or later it all breaks down. I know, Avon replied softly. The dream is ending. That is why the signal was sent. It was not a warning for you, it was a warning for me. My time is almost over. The light from his form began to dim and the hum of the tomb deepened. The giant near the door stirred again, its movement slower but more deliberate this time. Jalen raised his rifle. "Captain, it's moving." Mira raised her hand. "Hold your fire." The giant turned its head toward them, then back to the pod. It reached out a massive hand and pressed its palm against the wall beside Avon's projection. Energy flowed from the Guardian into the chamber, stabilizing the flickering lights. Reed stared at the readings. "It's giving power back, like it's trying to keep him alive." Avon looked at the Guardian and then back at the crew. "They were built to protect, not destroy. But without me, they will turn to stone forever. The dream will fade and their purpose will end." Mira asked, "Can we help you stay alive?" The hologram paused. "Perhaps, but it will come with a price. The energy needed to sustain me must come from living minds. Your connection to the human network might allow me to continue." Reed stepped back quickly. "You mean link yourself to our ship's systems? That could drain everything we have." Toma looked worried. "If we connect him, he might take control." Mira thought carefully. "Or he might save us all." Before she could decide, a low rumble shook the floor. The walls of the chamber cracked slightly and sand began to fall from the ceiling. Reed checked the scanner. The energy surge is reaching the surface. The Guardians outside are fully active. They could hear the echoing footsteps of the giants moving above the ground. The sound was slow and heavy. Like thunder rolling across the desert, Avon's voice grew softer. "You see now why I must remain here. If I wake fully, the Guardians will no longer wait. They will rise and fulfill their ancient command." Mira stepped closer. "And what is that command?" "To defend humanity," Avon answered. "At any cost." The light around him flickered again, and for a brief moment his calm face twisted with pain. Sparks shot across the cables attached to the pod. Reed rushed forward to shut down the overload, but Avon raised his hand. "Do not interfere," Mira shouted. "You're dying." "Let us help." Avon's expression softened again. "You already have. You reminded me that humans still live beyond this tomb. That means I can rest." The projection faded and alarms flashed across the control panels. The heartbeat sound from the pod began to slow. Reed looked at his monitor. "He's shutting himself down?" "No," Mira said firmly. "Not yet." She pressed her palm to the control surface. "Commander Avon, if you end the dream, what happens to the Guardians?" "They will sleep again," came the fading reply. "But the world will remember their watch." The hum fell silent. The blue lights faded and the giant near the doorway froze in place once more. Its eyes dimmed until nothing remained but cold steel. For a long time the crew stood in silence. Only the soft hiss of the air remained. Then Reed noticed something on his scanner. "Captain, wait. There's another energy source below us." Mira turned to him. "Another chamber?" "Yes, deeper than this one. Something still active down there." Toma checked the walls. "There's a passage here, but it's sealed. Can you open it?" Mira asked. "With time," Reed said, already unpacking his tools. Jalen looked uneasy. "Captain, maybe we shouldn't go deeper. If Avon wanted this place to rest, maybe we should let it." Mira looked at the silent pod and then back at the others. "Avon said the Guardians were built to protect something. If he's gone, that thing might still be down there. We need to know what it is." They worked for hours breaking through the sealed passage. Dust and sparks filled the air as Reed cut through the final barrier. When the door finally opened, a cold blue light poured out, flooding the chamber. Inside, they saw rows of strange cylindrical pods lined against the walls. Each one held a faintly glowing core, like miniature versions of the pod above. Reed whispered, "These are power units." "Thousands of them," Toma added. "No, not power units. They're memory cores. Each one has a name written beside it." Mira read the nearest one aloud. "Engineer Hale, Dr. Wren, Pilot Myra." She looked around in disbelief. "These are people." Reed looked at the data readings. "Their minds are stored here. Hundreds, maybe thousands of human consciousnesses, kept alive through the Guardian's network." Mira stepped back slowly, her voice trembling with awe. Avon wasn't just dreaming for himself. He was dreaming for all of them. The chamber was silent except for the faint hum of the cores. Above them, the tomb's heartbeat was gone. But here, deep beneath the sand, another rhythm continued, a quiet pulse of life waiting in the dark. And though the giants above had stopped moving, their purpose was not yet over. The dream was still alive, buried deep within Unearthed 4, waiting for the moment when humanity would once again need its guardians. The silence after Commander Avon's shutdown was heavy and deep. Inside the tomb, the crew of Horizon Dawn stood surrounded by the faint blue glow of the memory cores. Each core pulsed slowly, giving off the feeling that something alive was still inside. The hum that had filled the air earlier was gone, leaving only the sound of their breathing. Captain Mira Holt stepped closer to the nearest core and placed her hand against its smooth surface. "He kept all of them here," she said quietly. "The entire crew of his project. He must have linked their minds to the Guardians." Reed, the engineer, nodded slowly. "If that's true, these people have been alive in some form for centuries. But without Avon, the system may not hold for long." Toma, the linguist, looked around at the walls filled with names. Maybe this is what he meant when he said he was dreaming for all of them. They're part of the same network. The Guardians were built from their combined memories. Jalen, the security officer, scanned the area with a cautious eye. If that's the case, then losing power here could end everything. "We should leave before that happens." Mira didn't move. Her eyes were fixed on the soft blue light of the pods. "No. If these people are still here, we can't just walk away. There might be a way to preserve them." Reed sighed. "Maybe. But we'd need to transfer their data into our systems, and that would take hours. And if the tomb starts collapsing, we won't have time." Toma looked back at the tunnel they had come from. "Then we should at least copy what we can. Maybe we can bring a record back to Earth." Mira nodded slowly. "Do it. We'll take as much as we can before the system becomes unstable." Reed began setting up a transfer unit, connecting his tablet to one of the cores. The screen filled with lines of ancient data, some in human language, some unreadable. He smiled faintly. "It's working. I can access the surface level of their memory banks." But before he could say more, the floor beneath them began to shake. Dust fell from the ceiling, and a deep rumble echoed through the corridors above. Jalen steadied himself against the wall. "That came from the surface." Reed looked at his scanner. "No, it came from above and below. The entire structure is moving again." Mira's voice was calm but firm. "Everyone, pack up. We're heading back to the main chamber." They grabbed their gear and started up the passageway. The lights flickered as they moved, and the familiar hum of energy returned, this time louder and faster. By the time they reached the chamber of the Dreamer, the pod that held Avon was glowing again. Reed stared in disbelief. "That's not possible." His life signs were gone. Toma's voice trembled slightly. "Maybe the system refuses to let him go." The giant that had been frozen beside the pod now lifted its head. Its blue eyes flared bright, and the sound of heavy machinery echoed from the tunnels above. Jalen turned to Mira. "Captain, we need to get out of here right now." Mira didn't answer. Her gaze was fixed on the holographic platform above the pod. Light gathered there once more, and slowly the image of Commander Avon appeared again. His expression was calm, but there was no warmth in his eyes this time. "You should have left," he said in a low voice. "The dream cannot end, not while the enemy still exists." Mira stepped forward. "The enemy you fought is long gone, Commander. Humanity survived. You've done your duty." Avon's image flickered, his tone sharp. "No, the Guardians remain. They must fulfill their command. Humanity must be protected." Reed frowned. "Commander, if you activate them fully, they could destroy this planet." The hologram's eyes glowed brighter. "They were made to defend, not to destroy. But they will march to ensure no threat rises again. That is their purpose." Outside, the ground shook harder. Through the cracks in the chamber ceiling, faint light shone as the sand above shifted. The giants buried across Orthus 4 were waking. Reed checked his monitor again. "There's a massive energy surge from below. The power cores are emptying into the surface network." Jalen aimed his weapon toward the tunnel. "We won't make it if those things come down here." Mira's mind raced. Avon's link to the system must still exist. If we can find a way to break it, maybe we can stop the activation. Reed nodded quickly. "The main control node is near the power conduits. I can shut it down manually, but someone has to stay near the pod to monitor feedback." Toma looked at Mira. "I'll stay with you, Captain. Reed and Jalen can go to the node." Mira agreed with a firm nod. "Move fast. We might not have much time." Reed and Jalen ran down one of the glowing corridors. The sound of metal footsteps followed them, echoing from somewhere above. The tunnels shook again as dust rained down. Back in the chamber, Mira watched the holographic figure. Avon seemed more solid now, as if he was regaining control of his body through the energy of the tomb. "You don't have to do this," Mira said, her voice steady. The threat you feared no longer exists. Avon looked at her with tired eyes. You think the danger ever disappears? You forget what we saw, what we lost. Humanity will always face destruction. My guardians will ensure that never happens again. Toma stepped forward. You are not protecting humanity anymore. You are trapping it in fear. For a moment, Avon's expression softened, but then the lights brightened again, and the ground trembled harder. You cannot stop them, he said. They were built to obey. Reed's voice came through the comms. Captain, we found the control node. It's huge, but I think I can disable it. Do it, Mira said. Reed's hands moved quickly over the glowing controls. Sparks flew as he connected power tools to the conduits. Almost there, he said. Suddenly, a giant shadow filled the tunnel behind him. Jalen turned and fired his pulse rifle, the bright light flashing through the dust. The giant staggered but didn't fall. It reached forward, massive fingers slamming into the floor beside them. Reed shouted, I need more time. Then take it, Jalen yelled, firing again. The Guardian's arm rose, ready to strike. But the next second, the entire wall exploded with light as Reed ripped out the final cable. The control node went dark. Inside the chamber of the dreamer, the holographic image of Avon froze. His body shimmered like smoke. Mira shouted, Reed, what did you do? Reed's voice came through the static. I disconnected the main power core. The system is shutting down. The lights began to fade one by one. The hum of machinery turned into silence. The giant near the pod stopped moving and slowly lowered its head. Avon's image looked at Mira one last time. His voice was faint but clear. Then it is done. The dream ends here. The hologram dissolved into dust-like light and the pod's glow faded completely. Toma looked around the silent chamber. It's over. Mira nodded slowly, but her eyes remained on the pod. I hope he finally rests. They helped Reed and Jalen back to the chamber. Reed's suit was covered in dust and Jalen's arm was slightly burned from the heat of the power surge. Together they climbed back toward the surface, moving through tunnels that were now cold and still. When they emerged from the ruins, the twin suns of Orthus IV were setting behind the dunes. The horizon was calm again. All around them, half-buried giants stood silent once more, frozen like statues. Reed looked around and exhaled deeply. It's quiet again. Toma studied the nearest guardian. They're at peace now. No signals, no movement. Mira looked up at the fading sky. Commander Avon said he dreamed for humanity. Maybe now we carry that dream forward instead of leaving it buried. They returned to their shuttle and lifted off slowly. From the window, the surface of Orthus IV looked almost normal, just sand and ruins. But beneath those dunes lay a network of silent machines, an army that had once watched over mankind. As the ship entered orbit, Reed ran a final scan. The energy is gone, but there's a faint reading deep underground. A steady pulse, Mira smiled faintly. A heartbeat? Reed nodded. Yes, very faint. The crew sat quietly as the planet grew smaller behind them. The tomb of the giants was once again at rest, but its story would not be forgotten. Humanity had been guarded by machines born from sacrifice, and their legacy remained buried under the golden sands, waiting for the day when their purpose might be needed again. Above the silent world, Horizon Dawn turned toward the stars and began its long journey home, carrying with it the memory of the dreamer, who guarded humanity's hope between life and death. The Horizon Dawn sailed quietly through space, leaving Orthus IV behind. Captain Mira Holt stood at the window of the bridge, her hands folded behind her back. The twin suns of the desert world were small points of light now, fading as they moved further into the dark of space. She could still feel the hum of the tomb beneath her skin, the echo of machines that had lived for centuries without ever being alive. Reed was seated at the console, checking the ship's sensors repeatedly. The readings are stable, he said. The energy from the tomb is gone. Everything is shut down. No more signals, no more pulsing. The Guardians are at rest. Toma sat near the communications panel, still staring at the memory tablets he had downloaded from the tomb. It's hard to believe they were once alive in a way, he said quietly. All those minds linked to one man, dreaming to keep an army awake for centuries. Jalen, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, shook his head. It's like a story from the old legends. Giants, sleeping machines, and a dreamer holding it all together. Mira turned to face them. It wasn't a story, we saw it. And now we know the truth. Commander Avon sacrificed everything for a future he would never see. Those giants, the pods, the memory cores, They were all part of a plan to protect humanity. Even if no one knew it, he kept a promise for centuries. The crew sat in silence for a moment, each lost in thought. Even Reed, normally impatient and focused on machinery, seemed humbled. The scale of what they had discovered was beyond understanding. A man had become a bridge between life and machines, and an army of giants had obeyed him faithfully, guarding a world long forgotten. Toma spoke again. "We can't bring the tomb back online. Even if we could, it's too dangerous. But we have records. We can carry this knowledge to humanity. They will know what was done and maybe learn from it." Mira nodded. "Yes, the knowledge is as important as the Guardians themselves. And humanity doesn't need the giants to survive. But we must remember them. That is our duty now." Reed leaned back in his chair. "It's strange to think that Orthus IV is silent again. Nothing moves there except the wind and sand. But under it, everything is still alive in memory." Jalen frowned slightly. "Do you think the Guardians will ever wake again?" Mira shook her head. "Not unless someone disturbs the tomb. Their purpose was tied to Commander Avon. Now that his dream is over, they sleep. But their presence remains, waiting quietly. A reminder of what humans can create when they are determined to protect their own." The shuttle drifted further into the dark. Stars stretched across the sky in long streaks of light as they moved at faster than light speed. The crew began to relax, though the memory of what they had witnessed remained vivid. Hours later, as the shift ended, Mira returned to the observation deck. She thought of the Dreamer, the Guardians, and the many human minds stored in the pods below the sand. She wondered what it must have been like for Commander Avon to remain awake in a dream while his body slept, carrying the weight of history and responsibility. Reed joined her. "Captain, do you ever wonder what would have happened if we hadn't arrived?" Mira considered that for a moment. The tomb might have remained hidden forever. The Guardians would have continued sleeping and Avon would have remained in his pod. The world above might never have known what was beneath the sand. But I believe it's not a coincidence that we were sent. Some part of humanity needed to witness it to carry the story forward. Toma entered quietly. "And the records we brought," he said, holding the memory tablets, "will let others learn from it. They may never see the giants or the Dreamer, but they will know that humans can protect what they value, even across centuries." Mira nodded. "That is the real legacy. Not the machines, not even the Dreamer himself. The legacy is the courage, the sacrifice, and the hope that humanity can endure through impossible odds." Jalen stepped in last. "I still can't believe it. Giants made of metal and stone standing guard for centuries, and all for one man's dream. It's incredible." Mira smiled faintly. "Yes, and it's our responsibility to make sure it's remembered. We'll report everything. We'll warn humanity of what lies in the tomb, but we'll also honor the sacrifice. That is our duty as explorers and as humans." The crew prepared to leave the observation deck. They had charts to enter, logs to record, and data to send to the Federation. Yet even as they moved about the ship, the image of the silent giants under the sand stayed with them. The thought of their quiet patience and dedication left a profound impression on all four. Hours later, the desert world of Orthus IV shrank behind them. From orbit, it appeared peaceful and still, but beneath the surface, the tomb and its guardians remained. The sand had covered the ruins, hiding the enormous statues and the pods that contained human memories. Even in death or sleep, they were waiting, watching, ready to defend if humanity ever needed them again. Reed stood at the edge of the ship's deck, looking down at the tiny points of light that marked distant stars. "I wonder what it would be like to be a guardian," he said softly. "To stand for centuries without living, without dying, just waiting for a command." Mira glanced at him. "It would be lonely, but necessary. Some things are worth the wait. The Dreamer and his guardians remind us that some sacrifices are larger than life itself," Toma added quietly, "and that humanity can endure. Even when no one remembers, even when the odds seem impossible, someone will always stand watch." Jalen, usually silent, nodded. "Then we'll make sure the story is remembered. That alone is part of their protection now." The ship's engines hummed and the stars stretched into lines of light as they traveled further into the galaxy. Mira looked out at the endless expanse and felt a sense of peace. Orthus IV would remain a secret to most of humanity, a hidden monument to sacrifice and duty. But its memory and the story of the Dreamer and the giants would live on through them. Reed finally sat back, letting out a long sigh. I never thought I'd see something like that. A man and machines guarding humanity for centuries, all in silence. Incredible. Mira rested her hands on the railing. It's not just incredible. It's a lesson. One we must remember. Humanity can face anything if we are willing to dream, to sacrifice, and to protect one another. Toma held the memory tablets close. We have the proof now. The history, the guardians, the dreamer. We can share it safely without disturbing the tomb again. That's what matters. The crew stayed in silence for a while, watching the stars and thinking of the world they had left behind. Beneath Orthus 4, the guardians remained frozen, the dreamer at rest, their long watch complete for now. But even as the ship moved farther away, a faint, steady pulse remained in the deepest chambers of the tomb. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it reminded the crew that the legacy of the dreamer had not truly ended. Somewhere beneath the sands, the dreamer waited. His guardians waited. Humanity's protectors, silent and eternal, were still ready for the future they had sworn to defend. Mira smiled faintly, turning to her crew. We've seen something extraordinary. We'll carry it forward and humanity will remember. That is their gift and now ours too. Reed, Toma, and Jalen nodded in agreement. They had witnessed the impossible, and they understood the weight of what they had seen. Orthus 4 would be remembered not for its sands or storms, but for the giants, the dreamer, and the courage that had endured for centuries. The Horizon Dawn continued its journey through the stars. Humanity waited ahead, unaware of the silent guardians beneath a forgotten world. But the crew carried their story safely, a tale of hope, sacrifice, and the quiet power of duty. And beneath Orthus 4, deep under the sands, the dreamer slept, and the giants remained motionless, guarding a legacy that would endure long after the stars had shifted and the suns had set. The heartbeat beneath the tomb was faint, almost like a whisper in the silence. It was not a warning anymore. It was a promise. The promise of protection, the promise of hope, and the promise that humanity would never stand alone, as long as someone, somewhere, remembered.